Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the methodology on the new cost efficiency comparison for gas TSOs. I would appreciate that you're muted, but apparently Ivana, who organizes the event, has muted all of you, so I think that's fine. We will have 1 hour. We will try to be strict with the time. We are having, as usual, if you're familiar with our webinars, some housekeeping rules. So for your information, this meeting is being recorded. The slides and the recording will be published later afterwards on our website. So this is to be aware of it. And we will also have the opportunity for a Q&A at the end of the session. For that, we will use Slido. We will get back to that a bit later, but you already can see here the link in case you would already want to log in. We'll also project later a QR code, so there are multiple ways to access Slido. We are doing that because we are quite numerous. We are already having more than 130 people dialed in, so it's the most efficient way. I haven't introduced myself yet, but I'm Bart Verreek. I'm Deputy Head of the Gas Department. And with me today is Miguel Martinez. He's the project manager of this important project for us. And we will together manage this meeting. We also have our esteemed consultant, Per Agrel, who will take the bulk of the meeting of today, presenting the methodology, and then we have Q&A. But I will have a couple of quick introductory slides in order to stick to the time. As you know, this task that we have is mandated by regulatory underpinning, and it's our duty to come up with a benchmark of TSO efficiency by sometime in 2027. And the results of this are then relevant for the NRAs, so the regulatory authorities, to take it into account when they set the allowed revenue, the tariffs. So it's a multi-annual project. You see here 3 phases. We're in phase 1, or it's almost complete. So it's the design of the methodology. The next phase will be data collection and validation. Particular attention will also be given to the quality of it. And then even later, we will be focusing on the modeling, the actual benchmarking, and publicizing the results. Now, I think it's important to realize that the company Sumitsit developed the methodology. There will be a use of 3 concurrent models to assess efficiency of the TSOs and benchmark them. What I want to highlight here is that this is an inclusive process. So we have had consultation, public consultation. We also had a workshop sometime in July. We are, of course, being ACER, as it is in our name. We are an agency of the Corporation of Energy Regulators, so we are in close touch with the NRAs, also on this via our channels. And in a last effort also, we had an expert group reviewing the results, or better, the proposed methodology. So it's just to highlight that it doesn't come or fall out of the sky. Now, of course, Per will go into much more depth, but this is like, let's say, the most important overview slide of how we intend to benchmark the gas TSOs. And I will be very high level on this, but there are 2 elements that are critical here. It's a combination of execution and utilization, and on the other hand, a static and a dynamic dimension. So from the bottom, we will look at how things are, how are the costs efficient in view of the inputs. Of course, there is also an element over time. Whoever is efficient, can they maintain that over time? And whoever was not so efficient, can they improve over time? So that's something we also want to assess. And then apart from the pure cost element, there is also an element of utilization, the network planning. There are many challenges that the gas sector is facing, like lower demand. There is also decarbonization, and that element will also be taken into account. I'm not elaborating on the DEA, stochastic models, etc. I'm sure Per will do that in detail. So this is what we intend to do. It has been consulted, so you have all been able to provide input, and today we'll give an overview and allow for further questions. Now, this slide is a bit, there's a lot there, but it's a summary of what the methodology will do. In essence, there are many elements covered. I mentioned already a couple, like we will also try to take into account decarbonization. We want to make sure that TSOs are comparable in this robust methodology using DA and SFA. We'll also be covering legacy investments. We'll take utmost importance to data quality, which I just mentioned is an element of phase 2. So, and we will, or we aim to be transparent across the entire process. So there's much more to it. The report will be way more going into details, but this is a snapshot. Now, next steps, after phase 1, there is phase 2. And then here you see a bit, let's call it a bit a value chain of the data process. So we will have to define the data. And for all these three methodologies, similar data will be used based on what ACER, so the Association of Energy Regulators, did in the past. So it will be on a similar basis. We will have discussions, of course, with the relevant actors like TSOs, the regulators, and then we will launch the request. And there will also be some kind of audit of the data in order to ensure the quality and the respective responsibilities of the data supplied. The data will be cross-validated, and ultimately we'll get to a final data or a group of data that can be then used for the actual benchmarking. Upcoming, we have quite a number of reports. I think there's a report from the experts, there's a consultation responses, there's an actual final report from SummitSit. All of this will be published early November, first week. So that's what we will send proactively, of course, the link to all of you present here, so that you don't have to worry about it. As said, we will have a Q&A session. You can access it through various means. So you can ask your question if you had already prepared. You can already do it now or during the session that will follow now. I'm talking a bit so you can either scan the code or go directly via MS Teams. This is what I wanted to say in the first 10 minutes, apart from welcoming, so I'm giving you introductory remarks. Now I can introduce Per, who's professor. I think he's very well known in the industry. So he will provide you more details or the depth of the proposed methodology on which they worked. And I give the floor. I think by now everybody was able to scan it to Per. Go ahead,
So,
Per.
thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. We've seen some of you at the workshops in Brussels as well, but now I'm happy to go through the final proposal in a very short framework. And as Bernd mentioned, we will start with the feedback from the stakeholder consultation and the expert group review. So for those that followed it already, you have given opinions and you have expressed your concerns. And we will start by going through some highlights from that and then showing how this proposal that I'm presenting now, how that represents a change to the ones that we heard in the workshop in Brussels. There has also been an expert review with a more methodological focus, and I will give you some highlights from that. But for the rest of it, then you will have to wait a little bit for the report, but the report has a very logical focus, as you will see here. The proposal starts with the challenges that the TSOs are facing. The NRA needs to regulate TSOs that are handling these challenges. And then we derive from that the metrics that would correspond to solving the needs of regulation in the energy transition. And from the metrics, we will then derive the three models that you already had a glimpse of. And then we just fit the most appropriate methods to these models to solve them in the way that corresponds to the needs we have. From that, we can then derive the data that is necessary, the type of data, the characteristic of the data, and looking at how that data can be made comparable, so the entire process of standardization and harmonization, and then the entire process has to be made reliable as well in order to make sure that the data will correspond to something that gives robust results from this entire endeavor. So let's start with the stakeholder consultation. Here there was a clear distinction between the TSOs on one hand and their associations, and the users that are market participants, but also consultants, industry associations, and consumer associations. But there was some overlap as well. So when it comes to transparency and the support for having a strong benchmarking, we're using multiple methods and then something that corrects really well for the environmental conditions and not a black box just for prediction, then the opinions were very similar across the two groups. So the stakeholders really cared about this. The differences are more in the perhaps an apprehension towards benchmarking in general that was expressed from the TSO and especially their associations. And in terms of the types of models. So as we will show here, we will have two types of models, and the users were very much in favor of the dynamic models to look at evolution over time and utilization. And the TSOs were more in favor of execution models like we've had before, that look more at the efficiency of a given grid structure and not really the evolution and the utilization. There were also more concern on the TSO side about uncertainty in the data, the nature of randomness and coincidence, and whereas the users, they also highlighted the environment, the service quality aspect here. So how did we respond to this? Well, when it comes to transparency, we increased the transparency since the last time by opening up a new section in it where we modified a bit the concept of what's called the norm grid, it's basically just a scaling function for assets of different dimensions. So here we now generalize that concept and show that it doesn't need to be exactly the way it was in previous projects. It is a more general concept that is easier to understand, and we also exemplify that. We look at a stronger data validation, so I'll go through that. The documentation and the amount of documentation being done is also clarified a little bit. There will be caveats for automatic use of it, which was one of the concerns from the TSOs. And then, as you will see, we now clarify a bit the multi-method nature of it. and we have simplified the model structure. So in terms of the expert group are very much in favor also of the transparency, the multi-method character, and the dynamic approach that we have in this project. They also like the inclusion of both execution and utilization models together. And they also support the way we specify the models. We look at outliers and the data validation, the entire environmental correction process, and the measurement of totex rather than partials. What they recommended was to focus more on the multi-year result. So rather than highlighting the static as the main, then they said that in fact there are multiple statics I will go through. And this temporal aspect is something they highlighted. Let really the regulators and the participants take profit of the fact that we have an entire panel. So they will give a lot of results, and they can be combined, and they encouraged the users of doing that. They focused also at cost efficiency, and they de-emphasized the technical efficiency part and also the scale efficiency. And they recommended that we test for that rather than postulating it. They didn't like the idea of a primary and secondary model. And they also wanted us to be more clear on what we mean by dynamic models and dynamic efficiency. They also suggest that we will have a more proactive role for decommissioning. And they highlighted incentive problems in benchmarking with decommissioning in the way it was perceived before. And they also suggested that we use national WACC, capital cost of capital, as part of the analysis. And of course, transparency gives traceability of all kind of correction. So what we did now is a simplified model structure, as I'll show you. We avoided the designation of a primary and secondary model, and we now put that as a method into a model. We will test for the returns to scale, and we also changed the decommissioning run, providing that with incentives as well as the cost of capital. So we already recall the objective. The idea is that the study will give the minimum total expenditure for something that is structurally comparable and that provides the same level of quality adjusted output. So as I mentioned before, the way the report and the entire project has proceeded to develop this starts with the challenges. It looks at the regulatory needs, both in long term, so for the energy transition, medium term, when you look at evolution, and short term, to really take a look at what is the value of the current regulatory period output compared to the efforts. This derives a number of metrics, and from these metrics we have then derived 3 types of models, and these models have then been fit to the best types of methods to deliver on this. So a model, as you know, it has 3 types of elements here. We have the inputs, and the inputs here that constitutes both the OPEX and the CAPEX, and we'll take a look at how does the adjustments we've made for comparability of that. On the output side, we have various kind of services, the grid in itself, the transport it performs, the capacity it offers, and the coverage of a surface or a distance that the constitution of the grid makes. And then the Z variables here, they are then all the variables related back to the context and the operational features that we have. Now, the metrics that we will highlight in this, they are cost efficiency. So that's the major one, which is also the purpose of it. It's already in the definition. Is the cost minimized at a given output? And the second one that we highlight here is what's called CE2, which is the 2-dimensional cost efficiency, which is decomposed into CAPEX and OPEX, which gives an idea about improvement potential in different dimensions here, in a long term and a short term. And then from a dynamic perspective, it's really technological change and efficiency change. So the dynamic efficiency. Let me exemplify that a bit. So in a given year, like in 2025, the static efficiency, cost efficiency here will give you a ranking. that expresses how much of the current TOTEX that corresponds to best practice. So in this case, we have units here, and the red unit has the full cost efficiency, and some of the other ones have a lower. We have 75% somewhere. The dynamics of this, the dynamic efficiency, combines a series of static measures here, as you see. So they're all relative to the cost frontier at that time. And that actually highlights that the red unit here, the red TSO, they have achieved a remarkable improvement of their relative efficiency over time here, starting at maybe 75, and then over time here they have, through investments, operating expenditure, productivity increases, and so forth, they have improved that. And that is a second part of the highlights of the needs here. That is very interesting for the regulators to take that into account, this kind of movement, because here, obviously, the red unit is fully efficient, but it could also be units like the blue one here or the purple one that is improving over time without attaining full efficiency at the end. This is still remarkable. So let me immediately get to the most important slide of all that. This is the one with the three models. So as we had in the previous benchmarking, there is at the core of this a short-term perspective, immediate perspective for 1 year, as you've seen. This is what we call the execution model. The execution model focuses at efficient investment and efficient operations without asking the question, did these investments correspond to something that is immediately used today or tomorrow? So this is the question, is the cost corresponding to the investment, construction, maintenance, and operation of this asset, is it competitive compared to structurally comparable alternatives? So these kind of models here, they have as outputs the entire service provision that a TSO does. This corresponds to what has been done in previous benchmarkings as well. This is what we call, of course, a low-risk option, because in fact it doesn't put the utilization or volume risk at the TSO. The new element here is that we will solve this model not only with DA, which is a deterministic model that creates a very flexible frontier without assumptions from the analyst, but we'll also solve it using SFA. And we show in the report for these models here a practical example with US data where we apply step-by-step these models, and we show how it converges, and we also make tests with different model sample sizes to see whether this is a realistic or not. So now when we add up number of years here, then we get the series, the multi-year series that you saw a second ago. And this creates now the basis for the next model. So in this box here, we open the analysis and we look at what's called dynamics. That's time series. What happened between 2021 and 2025? We're interested in what's called dynamic efficiency here. So the evolution of catch up. So did the units catch up like we saw the previous one? The purple one is actually improving its relative position, although it's not fully efficient. We call that a catching up. And that's an important performance feature. This creates a measure here that gives an idea about the evolution of the productivity in the sector as well. So the kind of savings that together the sector is achieving by digitalization and by better investments and productivity increases by learning and operational improvements. What's now completely new here is the model called UD, which is utilization dynamics. So here we step up to the long term, because in the long term, of course, we will have changes to the grid utilization, to the types of networks we'll have, and probably also the intensity of usage of those. This means that the previous model here, the execution model, will be extended also with variables that correspond to the way these networks are used. So the deliveries, the peak load, the capacity used, or others. And we are aware that these variables here, they are time varying, and they also are non-controllable to a large extent from the TSOs. That means that the appropriate model that we have here is not the deterministic DA, but the stochastic model SFA, which is exactly geared up to address stochastic variables. This creates, of course, a volume and capacity risk, and this model here, it intends to inform the regulators and the sector about the direction, the long-term direction of the development, but not necessarily about the instantaneous efficiency. Now, all of this necessitates, of course, a lot of standardization, as we've seen before, and there are steps in this that correspond to the operating cost that will be, of course, functionally decomposed. There will be corrections for the salary, the staff rates, the currency, the inflation. It's very important then to remove elements that are out of scope. And for the investment data, then we'll go through two important corrections that I will show. We'll make real annuities, we'll correct for price level, inflation, labor cost, and then convert it into the benchmarked OPEX and CAPEX that you will see. In all, there are a number of these corrections that are well established throughout benchmarking and throughout sort of best practice benchmarking, not only in this sector. They relate back to the standardization of life and age and activity level and ownership for all assets, for the costs, as I mentioned before, and for the investments also to make them fully comparable. But there are also some new elements in this that relate back to the opinions that stakeholders and the expert group have expressed. So upgrades, decommissioning, repurposing, and H2 ready assets will have a specific highlight and data collection in this project here. For the cost, then the outsourced services and the labor contents and the decommissioning cost will be highlighted here and isolated as well. And for the investments, as I will show, legacy investments and the national capital cost and also the capitalized labor in investments will be subject to specific treatment. For those that have already undertaken benchmarkings with the regulation in Europe, then you've already seen that to some extent we're applying what's called the real annuity. So rather than having a nominal approach where you start with nominal cost, this example here is shown in the report, we have reinvestment in the middle of the period at exactly the same cost adjusted for inflation. Now, if you look at the cost of that, even when you correct for inflation, then you get a jagged curve like this, because at the end of the lifetime, then the asset, it looks like it's much cheaper than at the beginning because of the fact that the depreciation becomes just a small fraction of the real usage cost because it's in nominal terms. Whereas the real annuity comparison, where you have this curve here behind, it gives a completely flat usage cost over time as we go along. And then this cannot be compared to a nominal term because as you see here, it actually gets lower than a real annuity at the end of the lifetime and then completely inefficient when you make the reinvestment. So that's the real annuity. The second approach that is new here has to do with legacy investment. So as part of the runs here, we will neutralize the pre-regulation investment part. And here in this example here, we show an example where sort of there is a random but very similar investment intensity from the deregulation in 2000. And before that, we had two different policies. So one was very inefficient and the other one was actually biased on the other way. They didn't pay the full cost. And as shown here, if one would continue with the standard approach, then the unit cost for CAPEX, which is an important part of TOTEX, will not converge in the next 20 years. There will still be a large difference because of this pre-deregulation handicap that we gave one and the benefit that we gave to the other one. So that would actually hide the true operational similarity. If we, on the other hand, neutralize these by using a standardized value for those, then in this example, as we show in the report, we will see here that in fact they have exactly the same you have to really zoom in to see the very small differences in unit cost CAPEX, which actually is then what's happening. The managerial efficiency, once they're under EU regulation, shows that they have a similar managerial policy. Now, all of this necessitates a very meticulous data validation and a process from data collection from public sources, from all the kind of things that we'll take a look at, from TSOs and NRAs, and then a model preparation that will, of course, give feedback back to the data validation in a circular manner in order to look at the maximum data quality, both from preparation, and that involves multiple stakeholders here. So the data quality here doesn't only involve the consultants, but it's based on an entire system that we call here the pyramid, where the asset system and the audited financial statement is the basis. So we start with a sound basis, and then by using very clear guides and templates that include verification options, that should make it very or more difficult to report data that couldn't be processed in the optimal way. By having an intensive interaction and support activity to make sure that everybody understands the reporting requirements, a national validation phase with third-party audits, a cross-validation, both technical and economic, by the consultants and others interacting with that, and then a data analysis when it comes to the preparation that will feed back outliers and other findings to the two previous stages. The inputs and outputs here that depend on what kind of models we have, and then there are ways to address those. And what I like to highlight here is just the fact that we also have the blue part, which is related back to the environmentals. And for the environmentals, as you see here in Z, what we talk about are external data from public databases that are open, updated, and free. So you can go and check exactly what's happening here. They're not produced by the project itself. They relate back to the way the land is used, the type, the density, the access, the topography, the subsoil slope, the wetness, humidity, the water regime, the structure of it, granularity, number of components, depth to rock, volume of stone, climate, and then, of course, population and connection density. And all of these draw on the real asset locations for each TSO, which enables us to actually have a traceable but fully exact environmental correction for where the assets are and where they should be. So here are a few examples. Just we have land, we zoom in on a specific area here, showing the granularity of land use, but it's also relates back to soil features. Here we have bulk density, and the little blue one here is about wetness with 3 levels of wetness. Then, of course, all of this is very relevant to pipeline construction. Now, what is coming out from this? What kind of deliverables will we get? Well, as in the previous benchmarkings, we'll have a base case, which is related back to all the corrections that we have here, except for the environmentals. And then R2 will be the run, including the environmental correction that I just announced. So these two constitute the 2 elements that we had before, but there will also be 3 new ones here. So we will have a run here without the legacy investments. So meaning that we'll neutralize the initial performance evaluation effects of the investments that come in prior to deregulation. We will also look at one run inspired by the expert group with premium decommissioning, which means that we'll make sure that each TSO has incentives also in the terms of the benchmarking to decommission whatever assets they need to do without having a fear that would have an impact on seemingly on their capex aspect and their totals. And there will also be a run with a national cost of capital throughout, where you replace the standard real interest rate with a national one to see whether there could be distortions of that. Now, for all of these, there will also be a series of sensitivity analysis to look at the sensitivity with respect to different parameters. That's also something that has been done before. Now, done before, that relates back to, of course, a long tradition of international benchmarkings for regulatory purposes. So we have done this since around 25 years now. And this is then this project that we're preparing now will be then the fourth in terms of gas transmission. So it will be, the way it's set up through the premises here, the largest one. And it's, as I already highlighted here in blue, it also contains a number of new elements here. New elements in terms of new models. It contains new runs. It contains different ways of looking at operations. It contains much more dynamic elements than before. And it also contains a more in-depth appreciation for interpretation. So now you say that that may be just my opinion as having edited the report. But I like to close this by showing you a little assessment here, where we use a published paper by two researchers in the area, and they present something called the Best Practice Index for Regulatory Benchmarking. And here they can give different points, and you can get 8 points if your benchmarking corresponds to what's called best practice here. And lo and behold, here, what we'll find is that since we use the types of methods that they perform, the most competitive methods here, DA, SFA, and so forth, and we use them in combination, then we get another point. We use TOTEX, which is we've always done. We use panel data. In two different models, we use panel data. We deal with uncertainty, so we have DA, FSA scores. We use environmental factors, which is kind of unique for this one, part of the development. We have a large data set as well, especially for the panel. We have more than 30 companies in the other one. And then the last one, for which I give sort of between 0 and 1, is just a question of how it's performed, whether it's performed by external experts or internal, which of course I'm not entitled to evaluate because the project has not been fully decided by ACER. So the organization will be somewhere between 0 and 1, but it means that we are guaranteed to have at least 7 out of 8 points. So with this, I like to close my part by saluting the efforts for those stakeholders and the expert group as well for contributing to improving this project, and then wishing you all a good reading when you get the different reports. The reports will be made more readable in the sense that we have provided an ongoing example in it that shows in a highlighted way how these models could be performed, what kind of flavor of the results they can get, and that shows sort of feasibility of the type of proposals that we're proposing here. So with that, thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Per, for this clear overview. I think we already get quite some questions, so we'll try to use the maximum time that we have to address them, so you still are able to introduce more. As a reminder, we are using Slido, which you can also still find either here or in the chat. Yes. Okay, we agreed that Miguel will manage the questions, so I give the floor to Miguel. Please go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you both Bart and Per for your presentations. I hope they've been very helpful to understand how we've taken into account the very extensive input from the different interaction rounds and how that is reflected in the final models. We have a few questions that I've tried to bring in some categories. I think for some of these questions we can provide on behalf of ACER some our views, and then on others I think then also Sumitsit can illustrate some of the points that answer those views or questions. So there's a couple of questions on the data request about when it will start and how much data how much time there will be to answer the data. And also there's a question also related to this phase 2 about the audit that Bart has mentioned. So as it was shown in the slide, this is a process that will start in December of this year, and it would last approximately until October or November of last year. And it was important, I think Per has emphasized this, but these models, the data quality is quite important, particularly for DA, and especially to avoid that there is data that is not of good quality that affects the frontier. So we have developed quite a detailed proposal to work and with an extensive process. And then again, this will be launched shortly. I think it's important. This is a point that TSOs made during the workshop, to be informed about the process. We will come to TSOs before the start of the process, and then as the process starts, there's a number of points that have to be discussed with TSOs to make sure that the requests that we will bring forward, the definitions of the data that we will use, can work for all TSOs, and also the timelines. So on this, we will contact and discuss with TSOs before the end of the year, and then by January there should be more substantial meetings starting. In relation to the cost audit, one of the points that was raised in TCB 21 was whether all NRAs and also whether the data was of equal quality across all TSO submissions. And this is an important point, because if the data is not of equal quality, there could be that could affect the frontier and could eventually affect many TSOs. So one of the measures that we have brought forward to ensure that the quality of the data is the highest is to have an audit over the data submitted by TSOs, and that there will be some guidelines issued by ACER, and then there will be and then the data audit should be carried out in a decentralized manner, so it can be completed by the TSO or also the NRA. These are the two main points on the data request that were posted. There's a very important question, and on this one I'll come back to Per and to the three models on network utilization. And this is one of the core points that has been discussed throughout the project, also in the consultation and in the workshop. And there are 2 points to acknowledge here. The utilization of the network is an exogenous factor, so that's not in the control of TSOs. So from the start, it was clear that there had to be some measure of the costs that are controllable for TSOs, and that's what the static or execution static model provides for. It measures the cost, the execution of cost of tasks where TSOs have control, strictly that. And that's why that's what we bring under execution. That's a task that TSOs execute, and where there's no exogenous factors. And then the outcome of that will be how efficient the TSO has been building those assets and maintaining those assets, regardless of how they're used. But then in this discussion, I think market parties made it very clear that it was important to understand not only whether the execution of the TSO is efficient, but rather how efficient is the network as a whole. And that brings a different dimension. It's not the controllability of TSOs, but it has to do more with network planning. And that's what we build a second layer, a second model, which is the the utilization dynamic model that will take utilization parameters into account. And they shouldn't be mixed. They're different types of models, and they provide different results and different use. The execution is typically to be used in the allowed revenue decisions. The other one will inform a number of decisions more related to network planning. So it's different uses, and I think that is the approach that ACER is bringing forward to address both the concerns of TSOs, very clearly stating what is controllable or not controllable, and also the concerns and requests of market parties of saying we would like to better understand how those costs are related to the network use. On this, Per, I don't know if you want to complement, because it's an important point. It's probably one of the most important points in the design of this work.
Yes, thank you, Miguel. I think you expressed it fairly well, the distinction between the two. So the execution model that has a sort of a short-term focus, which is very comparable to the models that are used for cost efficiency in the classical sense in a revenue cap or something, where you look at whether or not the current grid is invested and operated at the competitive and best practice manner, whereas the utilization model that we highlight here, which is new, this actually gives a focus on whether or not the evolution of the current grid structure is going in the right dimension, which could be happened in several ways. So it could be an adjustment, the way decommissioning, repurposing, and so forth, whether they are adjusted in order to increase the value of the grid assets or the utilization, or whether or not one can actually find the opposite as well. Part of this grid will be used more intensively at certain elements. And I think it's very important for the regulators as well. You didn't really mention that, but there is also a demand from the regulators to have both a short-term view, so immediately something usable, but also a long-term view to know that whether or not they are piloting their regulation in such a way that they create incentives and that these incentives are well understood by the TSOs to also manage the energy transition in the way that the gas transmission companies could interact to facilitate as well.
Thank you, Per. I think there's also then another question on the choice of models, which is related to this one, which asks that because there are 3 different models, does this mean that there will be multiple efficiency scores for one TSO? And I think, Per, you can maybe address this shortly, which is related to the choice of models, because each of the results has a different view. So if you could just shortly expand on that.
Yes. So indeed, and this is one of the points where the expert group went even further than we had suggested, to say that just the way you can evaluate, let's say, an athlete and his performance. You can take a look at what he did in the qualifications. That's a short-term focus. Is the athlete really in good shape today, this afternoon, to run his 400 meters, whatever? But in fact, there is also a very important element here of what is happening over the medium term. So is this company improving its relative position over time? So that it could be something that should be incentivized, and that could inspire an interaction between the NRAs and TSOs. And then the utilization one is more of that's a long-term information. It is not likely to be immediately used in sort of revenue regulation, but it's to be really informing longer-term focus on that. So indeed, to answer it, there will be, from a very concrete sense, there will be 5 different scores from the execution model, so 1 per year, which means that the NRAs are not blocked to using just 2025 as the reference year. They can use whatever year they want. They can also take a look at combinations of that if they find it useful. And there will be 2 elements coming up from the dynamic efficiency models as well, to look at the evolution of the companies throughout time, like just we have for the red ones here. So how much did you improve or not? And were you part of the frontier during this period? So there will be multiple scores for the TSOs.
Thank you, Per. We have at least three questions that we would like to bring on comparability, on the use of results, and on the publication. So I'll start first. This will also be for you, Per. It's about comparability, which is another important point. And there's a question, or 3 questions, in fact, but I think we can answer them together. The first one is about how to consider TSO-specific conditions that are not sufficiently covered in the method, whether there is any process or way or instrument to look at, to collect, and then to look at possible factors that are not considered in the current proposal. Then we also have one about the heterogeneity of TSOs, or indeed 2. And the question is whether the different base years and regulatory periods across, and lengths of the regulatory period across TSOs are important. And extending this point, we also have a question about whether more general regulatory features, such as the unbundling obligations, affect the benchmark?
Yeah, so for the first question, indeed, I didn't have time to go through really all the reporting options here and the sub-projects, but there is one process, part of the process, which is the solicitation for and the instruction for, and then the process of evaluating what's called the TSO specific conditions, the operator specific conditions. So there will be a way for the TSOs, once they have submitted. So it's not coming early on, it's coming a bit later on the process. There will be a sort of a window for the TSOs to say, okay, these are the elements that I have submitted, but I've also seen how the model, how it's evolving. And I think the following conditions are not being, it doesn't have the attention they merit to have for my specific cost. So I like your evaluation of whether that, because I believe that they have an undue influence on my assessment. So there is an organized process for that with an organized evaluation that will have an impact on prior to the scores. So it's not an appeal process, it's integrated in the project. The second one, heterogeneity. Indeed, as you've seen, I will not go through it. There are multiple ways of looking at heterogeneity and evaluating that. The length of the regulatory periods, the types of base years or reference years that have been used. Some of these effects should be addressed immediately by the multi-year approach that we have here. So you can actually scale this back to get the types of evaluation you want if you have a 3, 4, or 5 year approach. So for the NRAs, this will be relatively easy to perform. Then I think the underlying question by the one who's asked is then whether or not there could be a difference in relative performance depending on which year you're evaluating. If I'm in the first year of my regulatory period, or if I'm in the 4th year of my regulatory period, when we sort of end the benchmarking or something. Because of course we know that there might be sort of differences in that. These effects could be in fact evaluated throughout the dynamic efficiency model, where we show an example of a regulatory reform in the report that you will receive. So how that reform was detected through the model ED. So it will be part of the analysis, but of course it really depends on exactly what kind of heterogeneity the questionnaire is referred to. So I cannot promise that it's always catered for, but here we are tooled to look at both the effects throughout time, but we also have this dynamic effect. The third one had to do with the unbundling. So we were aware in TCB 21 about the problems of comparability between unbundled, asset separated, and even recently asset separated and the integrated TSO. So looking at the tenure over time. So there is an adjustment period over that, and there is also sort of some differences in cost of capital and so forth throughout these. So I will not go through it here, but there was a way to isolate those. So to have a sort of a sub-frontier. So in the previous ones, and I think this will be our recommendation with this as well, there will be a specific attention not to mix asset separated TSOs with the integrated ones. So they will sort of participate in the same study, there will be the same data collection and everything, but when you calculate the frontier, then in fact the frontier for the integrated will not be necessarily integrating peers that have a different organizational structure. So we recognize that's a structural difference that cannot be completely suppressed by these things. So we also have a data reference change for that.
Thank you for that, Per. There's quite a few questions, and we only have five minutes to finish this webinar. So we would propose to address the last topic, which we have not touched upon in this Q&A, which relates to the publication. I see there's some questions, and actually the most voted question, and it relates the data that will be published at the end. So this is a point that the publication and the transparency is a very important point across this process. This was one of the elements that was discussed in TCB, and that by default in the design, because it was a voluntary work, the transparency had to be limited. And this is something that we would like to improve in this ACER work. And we're in the reports, there's a discussion that we also brought forward in the workshop, which basically aims at publishing all the information that is used in the models. There's a discussion in those documents, and also you will see it in the publication, where we propose to use all the information that is used for the models, and then the information that is considered commercially sensitive, and we're having a dialogue with TSOs for this, and with NRAs would not obviously be published. And then there are other sensitivity markings for the information depending on what we collect, particularly in the location, related to the location. So based on the final decisions that we make for that data, there will be parts of the data that cannot be disclosed. But the purpose is to have a very high level of transparency, making available all the information that is used in the models. I'll have my colleague Bart to complement in this point related to the availability of the data. And I think with this, we can close after Bart's question or answer.
Yeah, there's also a question on what system we will use for the data to be provided. So the interface. But on the previous one, I think, the motto is transparency as much as possible, but in line with what the regulation is stated, protection of sensitive commercial data. No? So that is how we will approach this. And then on the interface, on how data will be communicated to us, it was mentioned AGIS, which is an ACER tool, but we are currently investigating what will be the best and safest way for TSOs to transmit data to us. I just want to highlight that we have important experience in dealing with commercially sensitive data, as we are collecting REMIT data. So I assume you're aware what the REMIT is. So where we collect all, for example, energy trades, etc. This has to adhere to extremely high standards, and we are checking if we can aim for similar level of security in terms of commercially sensitive data. So we want to ensure or do the maximum possible that data transmitted by TSOs that is sensitive, or in general, that it's safely transmitted and stored to us. And then whatever is revealed and ultimately in a report, that only those data points that are not commercially sensitive can be published. So we have experience with that, but of course it's a day-to-day undertaking to ensure that we deliver on that. But we are still investigating what is the best interface. Do we have time for one more question, or we stop it here?
I think we close here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then I would like to thank you for the quite many questions that we got here and the lively discussion, even though in writing, I think many are very pertinent and relevant. And we also do understand various sensitivities on the part of the market users and TSOs. I hope this session was useful to you. Obviously, we cannot go in the full level of depth, but there the reports, the various documentation will be more detailing out. And as it is clear, we are only in phase 1. We have multi-annual work ahead of us. So thanks a lot for joining, and I wish you a very good day. And I also want to thank Per for the time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.